You're listening to Orbital in Conversation, interviews and discussion from Orbital Comics in central London with your host, Chris Thompson. You can find us online at orbitalcomics.com or as part of the Multiversity Comics network of podcasts, and you can subscribe via iTunes. Send all your comments, suggestions, and questions to chris@orbitalcomics.com. So thank you everyone for coming along for this panel discussion with Alan Davis. I'm sure that all of you here are big fans but want to hear more, which is exactly why I wanted to do it, because I'm a big fan and I was like, man, there are questions that I want to ask, and luckily I'm in a position to be able to do it. So, you know, it's nice to get that glimpse behind the curtain and get something more than just, I read these people's work and I love it. I wanted to sort of look back over your career a bit, Alan, and get a little bit of an idea about how you got into comics and the path it's taken. But for you, growing up in the UK, what was your experience reading comics? Was it something that you were a big fan of? What sort of exposure did you have to them as a kid?
Well, I was a huge fan of comics, but I don't really remember the continuity of what I got into when. But because I came from a larger family, I've got 4 brothers, they would all get different comics. So I would have my comics, they would have their comics. Some of them were into like Strike and the soccer magazines. Others, I mean, even my sister, she was getting girls' comics, so I'd see those. So I've seen pretty much everything. But my earliest memories are of things like The Eagle, Valiant, Steel Claw, Dan Dare, those sorts of things. They're my earliest memories. Although I can also remember being very much into Grimly Fiendish, which was in one of the Dundee comics. And yeah, there was just loads and loads of stuff. In those days, people didn't save comics, they passed them around. So you would have an uncle who would bring you comics that he had when he was a kid and give them to you. And the idea was that you'd give them to someone else, but you hid them under the bed and kept them because you were the start of the bug. So yeah, I couldn't say when it started, but I was always interested.
So did that idea of sort of hiding and hoarding your comics almost cultivate that sort of in you as far as wanting to collect and really, you know, own these things?
I really don't know. I think when I was hoarding them, it wasn't that I wanted to save them and sell them in the future. It was just that I wanted to study them. So I didn't hoard all comics. I only hoarded the comics that I liked. And then as I got older, this is like really sacrilegious, I used to tear the pages out of the comics that I liked and throw the rest away. So there were Eagle comics where I'd rip Dan Dare out and maybe something else and then throw the rest of it away. So I had a pile of like Dan Dare, making my own graphic novels kind of thing from Dan Dare. But that was the way it was. It was because I wanted to study those things. Although I've got to say that Frank Hampson wasn't like a huge influence on me. It was when I started to see black and white artwork that I could replicate. So we had Fantastic and Terrific reprinting all of the Marvel titles, and that was where I really started trying to imitate what I saw.
So was that just about the age you were reaching at that point, or were you finding that these American comics, the reprints that you were finding, were engaging you more and really exciting you?
I don't know. That's a grown-up question, and I was just a little kid. I mean, I really don't know what was going through my mind. When you're a little kid, it's like something glitters and you want it, or something is different and you want it. I don't know what was going on.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, maybe it shone a little brighter, but it's probably hard to say. It's like, yeah, hindsight when you're a child.
All I can say is that it moved something in me, and I reacted to it. I don't know what it was, why it happened, when it happened. It just did.
So you mentioned Dan Dare and the Frank Hampson stuff, but you were saying that wasn't necessarily a particular influence of yours. Was there stuff that you were seeing that was influencing you, and, you know, have you worked out what it was since? Again,
it's one of these things that you do retrospectively, so you're maybe not being totally accurate, that you're trying to put a complexion on something that happened a long time ago. But when I first seen the American comics, Jack Kirby was doing the majority of them. So I would start drawing Jack Kirby until I think I could draw as good as him, and then I would look for someone else. I mean, that's the naivety of youth. You learn a few of the tricks, and then you think, okay, I've got that, I don't need that anymore. So then I would find Steve Ditko and Gil Kane and people like that, and I would try to learn their tricks. And Steve Ditko and Gil Kane stuck with me. And I think Jack Kirby I never really got into again until I was old enough to understand how far he had gone. I think I underestimated Jack Kirby for a very long time. But yeah, I'd say that Steve Ditko, Gil Kane, Wally Wood, and then when I seen Neil Adams, that just completely blew me out of the water when I saw Neil Adams. I was 13 and I can remember exactly where that was. We were going on a camping trip to the New Forest, and this is in the days before safety. We were actually in the back of an open back lorry, about 20 scouts with our rucksacks and our sleeping bags, in a literally open back lorry, just on lying back with our arms over, no care to the fact that we're on the M1. And we pulled into a service station, all piled out of this. We all went in to buy all the sweets we could with the pocket money that we had to last us for 2 weeks. We're going to spend it all in that one spot. And I found comics that I'd never ever seen before, because our town wasn't served with them. And it was the first issue of Neil Adams' X-Men.
Wow.
And I just couldn't believe it. So then I spent 2 weeks trying to protect this, and actually got beaten up at one point because they wanted to know what I was hiding, that I wouldn't let anyone get into the bag because I was frightened someone was going to crease it.
So at this point, though, your idea of preserving them was just, I want to look after this because this is something that I can learn from, something I love. There was never any...
And I think a beauty should be protected. If there's something you really care about, you don't just toss it about. I had been brought up that, I still do now when I read a book, most people don't think the book's been cracked because I don't crack the spine on a paperback. I hold it like this, and when I finished, it's still got a perfectly intact. That was just the way that I was brought up, was that books were to be respected.
Yeah.
And I've got books that I've had since I was maybe 10. I've got an issue of Tom Sawyer that my granny got me for Christmas, and I've got a dinosaur book that I had from around the same period. And they're well thumbed, fallen a bit to bits a little bit, but I couldn't throw them away because I was told they were important. I believed they were important. And I think like that with everything. I protect my comics not because of value, but just because I want them to be there.
So does that mean you still have that X-Men issue that you protected through Scouts?
And actually, I've put it in a mailer bag now, because, and this is really depressing. I mean, even as I'm thinking about it, when I was doing Thor a few years ago, I was asked to draw something from an old issue of Thor, and I thought, I've got that issue. So I went to my collection and pulled it out, and as I pulled it out, this trail of brown dust fell. And it wasn't rust from the staples, it was that the comic had started to rot.
Right.
And I just thought, well... And when I opened up, it was like the cover came off, and so that was quite depressing. I hadn't looked at it for maybe 10 years, and in that time it sort of rotted away a bit.
Wow. So you just keep your comics out?
I can hear everyone saddened. Everyone's like, oh no, the poor comic. He should have put it in the bag earlier.
Yeah. So have you changed your ways then since? Do you sort of go, do you know what, I'm going to work through and bag this stuff for preservation?
No. I like it. I actually work in a small room. It's only 10 by 10. I built a studio at the bottom of the garden, and it's lined on three sides with bookshelves, and I've just got my entire comic collection around me. And I mean, I know that when I die, they're just going to throw a Molotov cocktail in there, because no one's going to be interested in those comics. They mean something to me, but I don't think they'll mean... Any collector will go, no, that's not worth anything, it's old, it's had it. But it's my life, everything that I've collected. So I like them to be there. I like to be able to just reach over and pull a comic out and look at it.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, I try to look after my comics in the sense that I want to preserve them for my lifetime so that I can continue to enjoy them while I can, but not... I don't think of anything beyond that, if you know what I mean.
Well, at one point I thought I'd be passing them on to my son. And I should say that my son was very, very interested in comics when he was younger. And he wanted to work in comics. And I said to him, well, will you make it Plan B? Because this is 20 odd years ago, but I thought comics aren't going very well. I don't think it's going to be around for him. So he actually... Well, he's a medical microbiologist now, and he's still got a slight interest in comics, but... I think he made the right decision to go with his Plan B, because I don't think he had the drive to succeed in comics. But he was very enthusiastic at comics at one point, but as he's grown older, he's just lost more and more interest. So sadly, I don't think he'll really care too much. He might keep the ones I've done, but I don't think he'll be interested in the rest. But you're talking about thousands of comics that are most likely starting to smell a bit, but I can't smell it.
I guess you've got an immunity to that now.
It's most like a safety blanket. It's maybe something that I enjoy. You don't have to get a fix of the comics.
It is true, though. I mean, there is something about cracking open an old comic and that smell that you get, which is amazing.
There's something about cracking open a new comic if it's a good one.
It's true. Yeah. No, exactly. Now, you talked about your son there and sort of saying, well, you should possibly have a plan B, maybe don't go into comics. What was your original plan A or B? Where were you intending to sort of, what were you going to do with your life?
Well, I never thought I was going to work in comics. I'd done my first year at A-levels and got a summer job and realised that I was making money and hated school and decided to drop out. I also met the girl who's now my wife. So we met when we were 17 and didn't bother going back to school, which was a disappointment to my mum. But she sort of realised that I wasn't enjoying the academic thing, partly because I've got a super smart brother. And although I wasn't bad academically, every teacher I ever saw used to say, "You're not like your brother, are you?" Like disappointed. So, I was quite happy, and I started working in a warehouse, and basically had built up quite a bit of seniority by the time I even got a chance to work in comics. So then it was a choice of whether I wanted to give up this job that had guaranteed 4 weeks holiday per year, guaranteed, I don't know if it was like 20 weeks on the sick pension benefits and all the rest of it, giving it all up to speculate on comics. So I came to it the other way round, that I got into comics just by pure dumb luck. Thought it's maybe something that I'll do for a couple of months, then the company will go bust, Marvel UK this was, and I'll just carry on the way I was, and I'll have a couple of comics that I did to be able to show the grandchildren and say, I did this once 40 years ago. I never thought it was going to be a career. It was just pure dumb luck.
I read that originally you started out doing some fanzines and stuff. Was that true?
That's true. What it was I was always interested in comics, but didn't pursue it as a career. So it was like a hobby that made me seem a bit quirky to most of the people that knew me. And when the How to Draw Comics the Marvel way came out, I thought, I've got to buy that. I've got to find out the secrets of the masters. So Mike Conroy had a shop called The Edge of Forever and a mailing company called Maya Merchandising. And I sent off to that and said, I wanted this book with a check. This is in the days long before email or anything else. And then I had a phone call saying, sorry, we don't have the book, but if you don't mind waiting, we'll send you as soon as we get it. So I said, okay, fair enough. About 2 months later, the book arrived, and there was a couple of free comics to make up for the wait. They weren't very good comics, but there was a beautiful letter with a Brian Lewis watermark in it. Now, I don't know if anyone remembers Brian Lewis doing the Hammer House, just incredible artwork. So I looked at this and thought, this is better than the comics. So that was like a real treasure. And then I thought, I'm going to have to send a thank you for being given these free comics. So I typed up on the typewriter, thank you, and it just looked so inadequate on this page compared to this. So I thought, I'll do a drawing on the page, and then it won't look so bad. So I did that, sent it off. Very next day, I got a phone call, can we get the original of this drawing? I said, you're holding it? It's like, wow, can you do more? So I said, yeah. So I started doing them for this fanzine. Again, not thinking anything was going to come of it. Then Mike Conroy had a partner, Les Chester, who said, Marvel's doing a convention, I think it was in Covent Gardens. Come down, audition. We heard they're looking for some artists. So I got into this queue. On one side of me there was a guy that had done a Conan story in a Frank Frazetta style, absolutely beautiful. The other side of me, a guy had done Daniela Dare in the Frank Hampson style, beautiful. And I'm there with these felt tip drawings on A4 thinking, God. And my brothers were there with me going, just go, you've come this far, just go. So I went up. The guy with the Frazettas got dismissed, and I was thinking, oh God, and I just feel my bowels going to water, thinking this is going to be humiliating. And I handed them over to Paul Neary, and he looked at them, and he called other people over, and he was like, look at this. And I was thinking, what's this? And I thought, there's got to be. And they said, would you do some work for us? And I thought, this can't be for real. Anyway, the Daniela Dare guy came along, and he got dismissed as well. And that was when I realised that what they were looking for was someone that could do simple black and white artwork that was going to be printed on toilet paper. And it would still work, because that's what printing was then. It was very, very cheap. It didn't have the standards now. They wanted someone who could tell a story, who could do good, solid artwork that could survive the vagaries of the printing process. And that was it. I was in. I was getting paid peanuts to draw Captain Britain. And the rest, as they say, happened later.
So obviously your storytelling was at a certain level by this point. Was this from you following those Gil Kane and Ditko and Kirby works?
I think that, but I think as well, I read an awful lot. I read a lot of pulp paperbacks, John Carter and Mars, E. Doc Smith's Lensman, things like that. Good solid stories, and understood the way that the story unfolded. Also TV and films, everything sort of contributes to that. But yeah, I think in a big part it was that Kirby, Ditko, Gil Kane, Wally Wood, they were all master storytellers. They knew exactly how to do things, and that had just been absorbed into my mind from a very young age, that I didn't question how it should be done. That is just the way it should be done. And I also thought I was going to be a writer, that when they said, do you want to do Captain Britain, I thought I was going to be writing it as well. But apparently illiteracy is a problem when it comes to writing, so I didn't get to do the writing.
So you were sort of mentioning about the work you were doing and sort of trying to replicate what these guys were doing. In thinking about how many of your comics and books that you've kept over the years, did you actually keep your original art and the things you were working on? Like, could you go into an archive and be like, this is 14-year-old Alan's work, etc.?
Not that I could say this is Gil Kane influenced or whatever. I think from a very early age, and this might be the arrogance of youth, is that you think you've learned it all. You learn a couple of tricks and you think, that's it, I know how to do that. And you start drawing. And I think some of it, I should say, is my parents always encouraged us to do anything creatively. And I thought my career long term was going to be a carpenter when I was 12. And I was very much into, for Christmas I always got tools. I got a fret saw and a coping saw and different types of pliers and hammers and things, and I was always making things. I was also into sculpting, which is my favourite art form, using clay, or we used to chisel, if you know breeze blocks, they're very easy to chisel with a knife. And so I used to do all sorts of things like that. I made my own dinosaurs when I was very young, big dinosaur models by using wire, covering them in papier-mâché, cutting them open, taking the wire out, sealing them up, putting the detail on a polyfiller and painting them. And I had a whole massive diorama that I ended up giving to the archaeology club teacher at school. But I mean, it would have been 3 times the size of this table, if it had gone out. Just this huge with volcanoes and everything, all built. And, it was just like I was always wanting to do something. So comics was just one part of that. It wasn't like I was driven to do comics. Yeah.
So you were creating more than you could sort of keep or keep your hands on. You were happy to be giving it away and sending it off like you did to Mike Conroy and the guys at the fanzine.
Well, that's it. I think my family was brought up with a sort of a work ethic where if you didn't do something in the day was wasted. And it wasn't necessarily that you had to earn money doing it. You just had to either learn something or to have achieved something to feel like it'd been worth getting up in the morning. And that had been instilled. I mean, all my brothers are like that, my brother and sister, that we still live like that we sort of work hard, we look forward to working. And also, I don't sleep very much. I only sleep for like 5 or 6 hours maximum a night. So even when I was young, I'd get up early and I'd be doing something before school. And, maybe staying up late to do things. And my mum was always, you've got to go to bed. And I was always excited about what I was doing. So it was, I think it's just that by nature, I want to be either understanding something or investigating something or making something. Otherwise, you might as well just stay in bed.
Yeah. And so you went straight on to Captain Britain, did you, after Marvel?
I'd done a couple of little bits, because there was a little bit of to and fro that after Paul had said, we want you to do something, he asked me to do some sample pages, and I sent those in, and then they asked me to do a Night Raven sketch, and then there were 2 covers that I did. One was, I think it was Marvel Superheroes and Marvel Tales, something like that. They weren't very good, again because I was drawn with a Tempo felt tip on an A4 pad, and Paul said, well, actually the professionals do it this big and you use brushes and pens, and I was, no one told me.
Yeah.
And so then it was like this steep learning curve, and Paul Neary became my mentor, that I would take the pages that I finished each month down to London, and he would say, well, you could do this, you could do that, change this, change that. And so that was part of the learning process as well. So Paul Neary was like incredibly influential in my life, because he just knows so much about comics, all aspects of comics.
And so what happened as part of this learning curve? When did you actually start? Because I'd read that you were drawing them at the same size as they were replicated, thinking that was it. When did you actually shift to sort of going larger? Was that straight away once you were told?
As soon as I started Captain Britain, yeah. As soon as I started Captain Britain, yeah.
Wow. And so, who was writing it at that point in time?
Dave Thorpe.
Right. And then Alan Moore actually came on and started writing it.
It wasn't as simple as that. I'd actually started working on Marvel Man because Gary Leach was very slow on Marvel Man, and he was doing incredible work. And it kind of terrified me because one of the things that Paul Neary told me was that if you can't do a page of inks in a day, you can't survive in the business. So I'd always work to that thing of you've got to get it done. Whereas Gary would just spend as long as it took to make a page wonderful.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'd see his pages and they were about this thick because of all the stuff that had been glued and stuck on top of it. And they were grubby from the amount of work he'd done on it. And they were absolutely incredible, but you think, this guy can't make a living out of this. Because at that time we were getting paid £40 to do a page of Marvel Man. The going rate at IPC was £90. And we were getting paid the £40 so that we maintained our royalty on the work. Warrior only had rights to use one English language edition, and then the royalties reverted to us, and we had to sign over if they were going to use it again, which didn't happen, but that's another story. So I'd started talking about doing the Marvel Man. Deskin didn't want to have anything to do with me. He didn't think I was up to Gary's standard, which was quite true, but others were saying, yeah, but then it was like there's only 2 superheroes being produced in Britain, and I was going to be doing both of them. And then Dave Thorpe kind of shot himself in the foot because he was very much more into doing political satire, whereas Marvel wanted superhero stories. And he did a story about Northern Ireland, and I read it and thought, there is no way I'm going to write this, because I just think it's condescending that you've got this guy with a Union Jack, flies into Middle Belfast, and he makes peace. And I thought, this is just, I'm not going to do it. So I was actually handing him a notice in. I said I'm quitting. And they said, no, don't do it. We'll get Dave to change it. People in the office think that we're going to be getting bombs through the letterbox if we do this. So they said to Dave to change the story. He came back, and it was a story now entitled Fabulest, which is an anagram of Belfast, if no one notices. And it was about these two, and it was meant to be like Lord of the Rings with these sort of elfy type people, which is also a bit of a slant on the Irish now that I think about it. But one was called the Colich, and the other was called the Rotten Pasts, Catholics and Protestants. And I just thought, this cannot be for real. So I said, I'm not doing this. And I actually had to produce a story in a weekend, which was the Attack of the Binary Beings, which was the first writing that I did for Marvel, because no one at Marvel had spotted this. I don't know if they just don't do crosswords, don't understand anagrams. No one had realised that these were just blatant anagrams, and it was exactly the same story. And even the IRA does anagrams. So, so I thought, this is bad. So anyway, it turned into a big furore, and I said, I'm quite happy to walk away with this now. But Dave ended up getting fired off it, which he was sticking to his principles, and I admire him for that. But at the same time, wrong place, wrong fight. He should have just backed down. So then it was, I'd already had the contact with Deskin and Alan Moore, and Paul Neary was also working on Warrior, and I don't remember who said what when, but it was really within a matter of days that all this happened. Between me going on to Warrior, and so some people remember it being the other way round. But from my recollection, I'd been offered Marvel Man before I knew anything about Alan Moore being asked to do Captain Britain.
Right.
But that was the way that it happened. And then that became another thing, like the writer and artist of the two superheroes are the same, it's the same person.
Yeah.
And then we went on to do DR and Quinch together, which really freaked 2000 AD out.
Well, that's a whole other thing, yeah.
Well, they didn't want us to work together.
Really?
Yeah, they said, you're already working together for 2 other companies, we can't have you working together.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, how did you guys juggle it? And I guess, you can speak mainly for your side. How did you keep these 3 things distinct and keep the working relationship fresh and not have them sort of blend or meld into one another?
We were young. I don't know, I think it was just, we wanted to do everything. It was like the world is your oyster. You're basically working class kids who think your career's been plotted out one way, and suddenly you've got this chance to do something that you really feel passionate about, and you just want to do everything. And so there didn't seem to be any conflict. It was this one is this type, this one is this type, this one is this type. I mean, in actual fact, The Iron Quinch was meant to be gritty and realistic. And the script had already been offered to a couple of artists, and they'd sent it back saying it was unintelligible. They couldn't understand what was going on. And eventually Steve McMahon said to me, I know you want to work with him, and I'm going to have to give you it because we've paid for it, we got to use it. So the first The Iron Quinch was a standalone story. And I was told to do it gritty and realistic. And I said, well, it's really got to be cartoon. I said, because the level of violence in this, you can't do it gritty and realistic. And he says, no, we want it gritty and realistic. You are our 2000 AD gritty and realistic artist, because I'd done Harry 20. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do it gritty and realistic. It's got to be cartoony because it's just too over the top. So I thought I'll draw very cartoony figures and do the gritty and realistic rendering on top of it. Which is why if you look at the first episode of The Iron Quinch, it doesn't look like the rest. And it was accepted, and it went, and that was going to be the end of it. But unfortunately the public liked it, and it had to come back. So that was it. That was how that happened. So like I said, Deskin didn't want me to work for Warrior, but after I'd done the first issue, which Des was hoping I was going to fall flat on my face, people accepted it, and it did help the fact that Gary was inking it, and so there was a gradual transition into my looser, open hack style compared to Gary's, very intensively worked style.
Yeah. So you spoke about the script for The Iron Quinch being unintelligible to a lot of people, and I've spoken
to the artist it was sent to.
Right. Okay.
It wasn't to. I don't know who it was. I just was told we sent this out to a bunch of artists. Said it's unintelligible, can't work on it. That was all I was told.
But I know for some people they really gravitate and get inspired by Alan's scripts. Like I've spoken to Dave Gibbons about it, and he said that. How did you find Alan's scripts? And did they vary between the projects, or was it still the same approach?
Well, we used to talk about them before the scripts were written. So I'd go over to his house, he'd come over to mine, and we'd talk through what the story was going to be, have an exchange of ideas. Then when the script was done, sometimes I would say, well, what about if we do this way? Because one of the things was with Captain Britain, there were just too many panels on a page, and there was no room for big dynamic shots. So I started after a point of actually drawing 2 print-size pages on one sheet. So Marvel was still paying me to do one sheet, but they were getting 2 pages, and that was why the Captain Britain strip sort of jumped. And you'll see that some of the pages are very simple compared to others. And that was just to try and get some dynamism, and that meant that the story had to change a little bit. Sometimes the dialogue, or you would get a bunch of characters talking, and getting the pointers coming down to them, it was just impossible without having sort of like some sort of tangle. So I would say, what about moving dialogue to this character, this character? And so then you started having characters who became silent, like Fascination in the Special Executive. She became silent because all her dialogue was getting moved to someone else. Because it just in the lineup of the action, that as he describes the action going across a panel, she was always in the middle when she spoke last, and there was no way to draw it and get the balloon. So the things like that are like minor technical things, but like I say, we were young and we were just trying everything.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to ask you about, because you do so much writing now, and you were saying that you had always imagined you were going to be writing these books, I wanted to ask what you had learnt from Alan, but it does sound as though actually you were learning together. It sounds in a way as though he would have learnt as much from you as a writer because you were such a vocal collaborator.
I don't know whether he'd have learned anything. I might have contributed ideas. I mean, I can remember things like with the one of the early issues of Captain Britain when he goes back to Braddock Manor. Alan didn't know that Braddock Manor had been destroyed. So we had Braddock Manor there, and I said, no, Braddock Manor was destroyed. And it was like, oh, what are we going to do? And I said, well, what about if we'd done it that was a hologram that was destroyed, because we got the holographic computer that can do that. So that was like that, and that was grafted on. So that was the kind of thing I contributed, rather than trying to teach him anything in any way. No, we were learning, but I think we were learning independently. And I think you're kind of selfish when you're in that. You're looking at your bit, and their bit had better be right, because you're not going to help them with it. You're concentrating on your bit. I think the person that I rate is the best writer I've ever worked with. Was Chris Claremont, and I learned a tremendous amount from him. I also learned a lot from Mike Barr. Now the two of them are totally different writers. Mike Barr does a full script, which is all of the dialogue and all of the panel descriptions, and everything is laid out. He tells you exactly what the page is going to look like. And I would say 99 times out of 100, if he says to you, this is how the panel is going to be, that is the best way for the panel to be. With Chris, you get or at that time, he was working the Marvel plot way, where basically he just emptied his brain onto the page. So you had page 1 to 3, boom. And I would try and go through it and break it down as panels and say this is going to be that. And you work it out across a page, you've got 12 panels. You think that's too much to draw on a page. So for the first few issues of, say, Excalibur that you'll see, there were way too many panels on a page because I was working that way. Then I realised that I could start moving stuff around. Mm-hmm. As soon as I did that, I could understand completely what to do. That Chris was giving you information, like if there's a character, he would tell you what clothes they wore, what food they liked, what television programs or music they liked. He told you everything, so that when you read it, it was like too much to consciously absorb. But you'd read it a couple of times, and then you wouldn't have to look at the script again. You knew the story. You knew who these people were, you knew what the story was, and it was just all in your head, and then it was down to you to interpret it however you wanted. So it was different. But I also think, going back to with Alan Moore, is I think that his scripts became far more verbose and encyclopedic. When I was getting the scripts, some of them were not like that. Right. They were very much simpler. So I think that in the same way as my art style evolved, I would imagine, only imagine that his scripting changed as he became more mature.
So how did it happen then that you sort of broke into the US market? Because at this point you were doing stuff that was for the UK, at least to begin with. So when did the jump come?
Well, this is another one of the dumb luck things. DC started headhunting at the time when I got into working on Warrior and Marvel. And the reason there were spaces at Warrior and Marvel was because DC was headhunting. Well, not completely, because there was also the thing about the page rate being pretty rubbish. So then the thing is, once I'd started working for Marvel UK and Warrior, Brian Bolland, Mick McMahon, Kev O'Neill and Dave Gibbons all were offered work by DC, which left a vacuum at 2000 AD. So originally when I'd seen Steve McManus, he'd said to me, there's no way he's getting any work, he's a superhero artist. We don't want Judge Dredd with a six-pack, which, the way he is now. And so that was me sort of completely blank from 2000 AD. But then, give it a couple of months, the four top artists that have gone from 2000 AD, and I was like, we'll give you a chance. We're going to let you co-pencil Harry 20 on the High Rock. And I thought, well, this is great. I'm going to do a little bit there. Still didn't think it was going to be a career. I'm trying to think of the other artist's name. It'll come to me in it. But he ended up dropping out. Right. The other artist. So suddenly I had the opportunity to do this 21-part series for 2000 AD. And I was, at the same time, I was doing Marvel Man and Captain Britain. And that was at the point where I had to decide to give up my day job. And because I was doing 36 pages of pencils and inks a month at that time, which was just ridiculous. But I was frightened to give anything up in case someone else got it. And
this is where the fact that you don't sleep that much sort of helped a lot, I can imagine.
I slept even less.
Yeah, goodness me. Okay, and so you now had these gigs, but the DC headhunting was continuing, was it? And so they now set their sights on you?
Well, that was it. Then I was offered, it was like the following year. I'd actually gone along to one of the DC headhunting things when they weren't interested in me. They just invited everybody along. Then I was offered an Aquaman miniseries that was eventually drawn by Neil Potsner, and I drew the first issue, sent it in, and in part because I'd done it so quickly, I never realised it at the time. They said, "Well, we are about to start doing the newsstand only, direct only editions, so they're going to be bringing 2 issues of Batman and the Outsiders out in the same month for a year, and they want me to do Batman and the Outsiders." And I said, well, I want to do Aquaman, because I loved Aquaman. When I was given Aquaman, it was like, this is the best thing, because when I was a kid, I swam a lot. And Superman, you can't fly, but I could swim underwater for ages, and I just thought I was Aquaman. So getting Aquaman was wonderful, and they said, no, we'll let you do the Aquaman, but we want you to do Batman and the Outsiders. I got the first script for Batman and the Outsiders and started working on it, and seen that Neil Potsner is now doing Aquaman. So that was like lesson number 1 of the way the industry works. But I spoke to Dick Giordano, and he said to me, I promise you, working on Batman and the Outsiders is a much better career move, which was true as well. And so I worked on Batman and the Outsiders for a year, and then I was offered Detective after that. But again, it was because in those days, speed was as important as storytelling. They weren't interested in the graphics standard. They wanted someone who could draw really fast and get a good story because even then American printing was really bad. And they also went on to flexographic a little while later, which if anyone remembers flexographic comics, they stopped using the metal printing plates and started using plastic ones. And if a line was thinner than a certain thickness, it would break off. Not only would it break off, it'd stick somewhere else where you didn't want it. So it'd be on the printing plates. So you'd get all these cobweb patterns appearing all over. And they had to change the plates more often, but they didn't bother doing it. So as the comics were printed, these plastic plates actually just got flattened. So that was the style of artwork they wanted that could survive that.
Right. Wow. So, you see, I was going to ask you, getting the Batman gig to start, like you were on Batman The Outsiders, then you went to Detective. I was thinking this must be a dream come true, but actually you were like, I want to do Aquaman.
Well, I was initially. That lasted for about a month.
Yeah, right.
No, I mean, it was just so much was going. It was a really exciting time in my life because there was so much going on. I mean, I also had a wife and kids, which I should say is that when I actually quit my full-time job to work in comics, I had a son who was a year and my daughter soon to be born. And Paul Neary said to me, what are you going to do? You're going to work in comics full-time? You've got all this work. You're going to be able to make it. And I said, I don't know. It's so fly-by-night. I've got this job with all this sort of job security. It's mundane. It's like vanilla all the way, but, it's safe and I've got a wife and kids.
Yeah.
And he was saying, no, I think you'll do it. And I said, no. And he actually said to me, because I said to him, well, why don't you do it? And he said, because you're better than me. And he says, you can do it. I've got faith in you. So I went and said to my wife, Paul thinks I should do this, but I really don't think so. And this was that pivotal moment that my wife said, do it, because if you don't do it, you're a rent for the rest of your life. And I said, well, what about the rent and everything else? And she said, do it. We'll figure something out. So that was my wife that she gave me that chance. I mean, now everyone was telling me, everyone, we always knew. But at the time, people just thought I was a freak, doing something weird. As soon as you made a success, everybody knew.
Comes out and they're like, yeah, I believed in you all along. Okay, so that's interesting because you were worried about stability and stuff like that, but you took the plunge. So was that when you started on Batman and the Outsiders, or just before or after?
No, that was when I was doing the Harry 20.
Okay,
that was when I went full time. And that was because John Watkiss, that was who was meant to be doing the other part of it. He was going to be the senior artist and I was going to be filling in. So on Harry 20 I actually did the third issue first, and John Watkiss was meant to be doing episodes 1 and 2. And he was working for Saatchi & Saatchi at the time, so he had like a really good paying advertising job. So then they said, no, we want you to do 1 and 2 now. Stop working on 3. Do 1 and 2 now. John's going to start on 4 and 5. And so I did 1 and 2 and 3, and then it was John can't do 4 and 5, and that was when I said I could go full time. Just too much work.
Yeah. So you were obviously freelance and needing to have certain security, but then you were working on the Batman stuff, and you started Batman Year 2.
Yeah.
And that was the one you did the first issue of.
Yeah, and then quit.
And quit. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Oh, well, I mean, the way that I regard this, I mean, it's in print, so I mean, I'm not sort of telling tales out of school or anything. Denny O'Neil was the editor, and I think Denny O'Neil's a great writer, but as an editor, it's a completely different skill. I mean, the idea that someone can be a great writer is going to make them a great editor is just complete nonsense. And I would phone Denny up with a problem and say, there's something that I need to sort out here, and he just wouldn't get back to me. And it would be week after week after week this would happen. And we were doing the first issue of Year 2, and I said, there's a different gun appearing in the Year 1 that David Mazzucchelli had done from the gun I've been asked to draw. Can they change it? Because it's only in one panel, but Batman's meant to be using a Mauser, which is like a big machine pistol, whereas they've got him holding a little Saturday night special, Joe Chill, when he kills the Wayne's parents. So I said, it has to be a bigger gun for it to be right. He never got back to me. So I thought, I'm just going to carry on. I'm going to do what Mike's asked for. I'm going to do the Mauser. I sent the artwork in, and this was just before Christmas. And again, I've got kids, I've got family. I always took 2 weeks off at Christmas.
Yeah.
So I'd got all the work out of the way. And I get Denny's assistant phone up. You've drawn the wrong gun. And I thought, no, I've not drawn the wrong gun. I've done the one in strip. Yeah, I know, but that's not the right gun. We've got to go with the other gun. I says, not my problem. He says, well, actually, we need the pages redrawn. And I says, I'm not doing them. I said, it's Christmas, I'm not going to do it. And it sort of turned into a bit of a thing. And so I had a bit of an argument with the assistant editor and says, look, it's not your fault. I'm not going to say any more to you. So I phoned Denny, got his answer machine again and says, hi Denny, it's just me, just let you know I'm quitting, and put the phone down. And so then the next day I had 3 or 4 phone calls from different people at DC. Oh, you're overreacting. But I just thought, nah, that's enough. Because I should also say at that time, Chris Claremont had already been talking to me about doing Excalibur.
Right, okay.
So I thought, I'm just going to have a couple of months off. I don't need this. But I just thought, I don't want to be working with someone who's got so little concern or respect for what I'm doing that I phone him and say, this isn't going to work. And then after I've done all the work, say, no, you've done it wrong. That just really infuriated me.
No, it was interesting because you were talking before about the stuff with Dave Thorpe and Captain Britain, and essentially you were saying, well, I'm out of this, and so you weren't...
I react like that a lot.
Yeah, you weren't afraid to go, well, no, and even in the case of now you are full-time and to a degree you needed the job security, but you still had these principles where you kind of go, do you know what, I still have limits, I'm not just doing anything for the check.
I think I should maybe say that I was actually one of the union organisers when I worked in a regular job.
Right.
If anyone knows anything about the printing industry, I was an FOC in Sogat, which is farther of the chapel. It's like the shop steward, and I was the assistant shop steward for most of the time, and the shop steward for a very short amount of time. But I always thought that compromise is given in stages. If a situation's not good, just leave it. Don't try and save it. And that's pretty much how I've always worked, is if someone's messed you about, just losing your temper at them isn't going to fix it. It's just going to be a hiatus, a temporary change, but it's not going to make it any better in the long run. So I usually just say, that's it, forget it, I'm gone.
And yet you're still successfully married, which is incredibly great.
Well, the thing is I think that my wife knows the way that I am. She knows the way that we've known each other since we were 17, so we've grown up together, and we give each other space. But she's never done anything that I feel like walking away.
Yeah.
I mean, like I say, I think that the way that Denny acted, no matter what the reason, it just felt like complete contempt. And like I say, with Dave Thorpe, a very principled guy. He wanted to do something, and I thought, I just don't want to do it. But I wasn't going to sort of kick up and say, I want it my way, because apart from anything else, he was an editor at Marvel UK at the time. So I thought they'd go with him. So I just thought, there's no point arguing.
Yeah. So you mentioned that at the point you left Batman, it was a detective. You had been speaking with Chris Claremont, and so you knew that you could have a couple of months off, and then you were going into Excalibur. What had sort of been the phone call that led to that? What was he sort of pitching to you?
Well, what actually happened was about literally a day after I'd agreed to do Batman and the Outsiders, Chris phoned up and said, will you do the X-Men? And I said, well, actually, I've just agreed to work on Batman and the Outsiders. He said, have you signed a contract? And I said, no. And he says, well, you can still do the X-Men. I said, no, I've given him a word. I said, I'll do it. Now, it wasn't me being purely, noble. It was the fact that I was terrified to work with Chris Claremont, because I thought, John Byrne and all the other people that have worked on the X-Men, I thought, I don't even know about perspective yet. I was still learning the basics. So I thought, I can't do this. So months later, Chris phoned again. Will you do the X-Men? Getting John Romita Jr.'s leaving soon. Will you do the X-Men? No, I wouldn't do it. And it went on like that for all the way through Batman Year 2. And eventually, Chris phoned up and he says, look, I know you don't want to do the X-Men, but we're going to do something new. It's going to be called Excalibur, and it's got Captain Britain in it. And it was like, here's the hook. Now, I'd sort of like said my goodbyes to Captain Britain, but I thought, that sounds great. So I said, yeah, let me just finish this year too, and I'm with you. And then that was it.
Right. So did you jump into doing sort of preliminary work, or did you actually have a couple of months off?
No, they gave me 2 annuals. Marvel gave me 2 annuals. I did a New Mutants annual and an X-Men annual before I did that. Right. So I had 2 years, 2 months of work, and well, it's actually more. It's more like 3 months of working with Chris before I went into Excalibur.
And so how was Excalibur for you? Because I know as someone reading it at the time, it felt like such a magical coming together of characters and creators and I don't know, it just seemed to click. But what was it on your side, the creative side of things?
Well, it was a little bit weird because you have to sort of put this again into historical context. Frank Miller's Dark Knight, I think, had come out. And again, it was people saying comics are for adults. And Marvel advertised Excalibur as being the cosmic comedy. And someone actually wrote, and this is before anything was ever seen, wrote into Marvel, "Are you people stupid? Don't you realise that comics are mature now? We don't want any more silly comics trying to give us a bad reputation." And it's like this real hate mail. And I said to Anne Nashenti, who's the editor, "What is this with the cosmic comedy?" And she said, "Yeah, it's going to have a humorous edge to it. Didn't you know about this?" Which is something Chris hadn't told me. And I said, "No, how's that going to be?" Because I was thinking, like, is it like Not Brand Ek? Or, one of those really silly comics. And she says, "No." And so Chris was there as well. And I said, "What's the comedy?" He says, "You're going to do the comedy." And I says, "I'm going to do the comedy. And he says, "Yeah, you do funny stuff. We've seen your Batman." And I thought, is that a slap in the face or is that a compliment? And because I know that at that time there was a bit of a fuss about the fact that I'd drawn Batman smiling in a story, which had like that you don't have Batman smiling. And it was actually Mike Barr is saying the scariest thing that someone can do when you point a gun at them is if they smile at you like they're not scared. And he says that's what Batman does, that the guy levels his gun and Batman smiles. So there was a lot of people saying you do this silly stuff, and we had the Joker and we had all the old characters. So I don't know if there was something like that, but that was something that at the time I just thought, oh God, what have I got myself into here? The cosmic comedy, and you're doing the humour. So that was strange.
So as Excalibur went on, you sort of drifted away from it. There was more people coming to fill in, and I think you had stopped working on it. Was that about being offered something else? No.
What happened was initially I got ill shortly. I don't know if I'd done like maybe the third or fourth issue, and I got a reaction to something. I just broke out in eczema all over my body. I couldn't sleep or anything, just complete rashes all the time. And I just was up one morning really late walking the streets because I couldn't sleep. Because I was in so much pain with my skin. So I just got to this point where I thought, I've actually got to say I can't do any more. And when I phoned Terry Cavan, who was the editor then, and said I can't do any more, he says, "We'll just give you a break." And I think they got Ron Lim or someone to do a couple of issues. Then I went back to it, and I was enjoying it, but the scripts were always late, and they were getting later and later all the time. And I didn't realise what the politics behind why the scripts were late, but it meant that I never had a full month to do a full issue. So I was always having to rush. And I said to Terry, "I'm going on holiday in June. We've got 3 months to get ahead. I want to have 2 weeks off in June." The scripts just got later and later and later. And the one in June arrived that I had to take the work on holiday with me. And that was just like, nah, this isn't good. So I spent the first week of a 2-week holiday in the hotel room drawing. And that was just it. I just said, I'm not doing it anymore. This is like family time. It's the one thing that's always been very important to me is that although I work hard and long hours, we usually had like a month's summer holiday with the kids and 2 weeks at Christmas. And if that got messed about with it, which it did on Excalibur, I just thought, no, this isn't good.
And so, was this about the kind of relationship you had with Chris, or just the fact that it was essentially at that time, a writer's market in that he could do what he wanted and so he just did?
No, I don't know. I think some of it is because writers protect their ideas, because a writer's idea is all they have. You can talk about the writer's style and various other things, but the nugget of the idea is what they have, and they don't want to put that into the office because as soon as it's been read, someone else is going to rip it off. And I've actually had that happen. I've put a script in. I actually had Tom DeFalco thanking me for an idea that he used in a printed story before it came out in mine, and he thanked me for it. So a lot of writers are terrified to let their ideas out, so they deliberately leave the script as late as possible.
Right.
And I think that there was some of that with Chris, is that everyone was looking to Chris as being the guy to rip off because he was the guy that was the huge success at the time. So I don't know if it was that. I might be misunderstanding the situation, but that's what it seemed to be to me. But whatever the reason, I just decided I'm not going to let comics take over my life, and just said I'm going to quit with this issue, and that was it.
And so now I can't remember the chronology exactly because I was reading the stuff at the time, but I don't remember what you did in between. I just remember that then suddenly issue 42 of Excalibur is your triumphant return. Now you're writing and drawing it, and you've sort of amped up everything. It's like that cosmic comedy brief that you had. I feel like you sort of took that next level. Was that the next thing that you did? What happened in between?
I don't know what happened at Marvel. I mean, I was obviously doing work elsewhere, but I really got on with Terry Kavanagh. He was, like, hands down the best editor that I ever worked with. And he'd become a good friend. And he said to me, why don't you come back and do Excalibur? Because Chris was moving on to something else. And I said, what, writing it as well as drawing it? He says, you're writing it. I said, well, you don't know if I can write. And I'd done Wolverine Bloodlust. And he said, well, you managed that all right. I said, yeah, but I don't think I can do a monthly book and pencil it. And he says, well, we can give you a good lead time, so you'll have plenty of time. And I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And sort of set off. And the only thing that they said to me was that they wanted the Phoenix rationalised, because they were wanting to do something else with that. So that was the only brief that I had. The problem was after I got the first 3 issues done, Tom DeFalco came into Terry's office and was going through the drawers checking stuff. And says, you've got 3 issues of Excalibur here. And he says, yeah, we're giving Alan sort of like a lead time. He hasn't needed any of it yet. He's managed to keep on deadline. And Tom says, well, look, we're doing a summer schedule now. We're bringing the 2 comics out a month. We'll put Excalibur on that schedule now. So I went from being 2 months ahead to being 1 month behind.
Wow.
And I just thought, this is insane. So from then on, it was like being a hamster in a treadmill, just going crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is the thing, when people see the artwork, they think, oh, you really rushed that one, didn't you? And they think, well, I had to, or else I wasn't going to draw it,
Yeah, of course, because you were writing and drawing it. And then I think coming up to the 50th issue, wasn't that double-sized as well? So you had all that to consider?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
if you can't stand the heat, you shouldn't be there in the first place.
But and there was a point then where you did end up leaving again.
There was a lot going on that I wasn't happy with, but I'd also got to the point where I thought I'd really like to try and do something different. I'd like to try and do something that I create from scratch rather than doing Excalibur. Part of the thing was because they constantly wanted Excalibur to cross over into other titles, but I kept coming up with setups where it was impossible for Excalibur to cross over, and they didn't like that because they wanted the big events, and I didn't want to do the big events, so they were talking about more crossovers, and I thought, no, I don't want to do that. Although I ended up doing that when I agreed to plot X-Men for a year, which was...
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah. And that was between the 2 books, wasn't it?
I was doing both Uncanny and X-Men for a year,
yeah. And then you were just writing stuff, so it was, you were writing Excalibur, you were writing X-Men. Once you were given that freedom to write your own stuff and even write for other artists, were you just like, I'm not looking back again?
No, I don't think you feel like that, because you're only as good as your last job in comics, and I wanted to do something for DC. I'd met Archie Goodwin a few times, and I really liked Archie Goodwin, and they said to me, would you do Batman, would you do Superman, whatever, and I thought, I don't know if I really want to do that, and because I was still sort of quite happy at Marvel. And then he says, well, look, we're doing these new things called Elseworlds. He says you can do absolutely anything you want. And he said it's not going to be part of the continuity, because again with DC, what I didn't want to do is, I knew that Batman and Superman were always crossing over. I wanted to do something away from that. And he says, well, what about if you did a JL Elseworld? You could do anything you wanted. And by the time I walked back from lunch to the hotel, I'd already thought of the idea that I wanted to do for the first nail. I wrote the proposal up, sent it in, and they said, nah, we don't like it. We think it's not enough of a twist. We want something different. Why don't you work on Superman for us? And I said no, so I went back to Marvel. And then a different editor came along and says, what would you like to do for DC? And I said, well, actually, there's a proposal. If you ask Mike Carlin for it, he's got it. And so after this went on for about 3.5, 4 years, something like that, Mike Carlin met me at a convention and he says, the only way you're going to work for DC is if we let you do that nail thing, isn't it? I said, yep. And he says, okay, well, Casey Carlson had been my editor on doing the Legion of Superhero covers, and Casey agreed to be the editor on. He was actually pushing for me to do it. He had read the nail and liked the idea, and so I started work on that, and that was great. Yeah.
So was this before or after the clandestine stuff?
Before, I think.
Right.
Was it before? I don't even.
I always find it hard because I'm sort of going.
I'm getting old.
Is the nail that old as well? I remember buying the
I think it was before the clandestine. See, then when I went to Marvel UK to do the clandestine, that was again having to prove yourself. Because people say, because that's what DC said is, yeah, we know you've written something for Marvel, but you haven't written anything for DC. Like, our standards are higher. You might satisfy those guys, but we've got a much higher standard. It gave you that sort of feeling. So then when I went to Marvel UK, it was, well, you're going to do something for us. Well, what are you going to do? And again, luckily enough, Paul Neary was there, and he said, anything as long as it's a group book. Just do anything as long as it's a group book. And they didn't interfere in any way. Just let me do whatever I wanted because it was a group. So that was wonderful as well.
Now, I did want to open up for some questions because I'm looking at time, and I know I can't keep Alan here forever, even though it's like finally getting to do this. I would love to, but I'm sure you guys have got some stuff you want to ask. So does anyone want to lead off with a question? Yeah, just
Sorry, I can ask a sad continuity question. When you got to the 50th issue of Excalibur, was that something that had been planned from the start, or was that completely you taking the reins?
No, I mean, this is something that a lot of people say, which I actually take as being quite flattering, that they can't believe that I tied up a lot of extraneous loose ends and made it seem like it was the way it was always meant to be. But I accept the responsibility. Yeah, it wasn't planned at all. I don't know if it's what Chris had got planned, because I didn't really have any input in the very early stories of Clandestine. I just got the script and worked on it. I only started really, I think it was like issue 14 was the first one that I actually submitted what was like a plot. It was the one with the Impossible Man in. That was the first one, and that was a story that I'd originally proposed at Marvel UK, where they went to an alternate reality and everything was weird. Captain America was a cyborg like Deathlock, and Giant Man was standing in the mid-Atlantic Ocean, and he had a weather pattern around him because he was so giant. That was the idea that I proposed to Marvel UK years before. And so that was my first, although my first writing for Marvel, strangely, is Excalibur 4's cover with the janitor. And I wrote the blurb on the cover.
Yes. I remember that too. One thing I wanted to ask again very quickly, just that I'd remembered, you spoke about, again, you sort of were saying, to your son, have a plan B, don't go into this. And you're saying that you felt that ultimately he maybe didn't have I think you said the hunger, essentially along those lines, or whatever. What is it about you? Because there's so much that we haven't discussed, like between Clandestine and now, you've just done so much. You've remained prolific and just continually worked right through. What is it that gives you still the hunger? How do you maintain that?
Trying to get it right.
Yeah.
That every time I finish a job, I just look at it and think, should have done that different. I enjoy it. This is something that I do try to encourage people to draw, because people say I can't draw, and I think this is the most stupid thing, and I don't care if I'm insulting anyone by saying this, that if you go to school and you come out unable to read and write, you're considered illiterate. The school's either failed you or you are developmentally challenged. If you can't draw, it's because you don't have the talent, which is just complete nonsense. That's like saying if you haven't got long legs, you can't run. Or if you haven't got ginger hair, you can't be a chef or whatever. It's just arbitrary and stupid. Most times people are taught the wrong way to draw, and it stops them progressing onto the next thing. Mm-hmm. But there's something so satisfying about being able to get a blank sheet of paper and create something on that blank sheet of paper, just on its own, for no other reason than the fact that you can do it. If you do it for very young kids, it's like a magic trick, but they still try and replicate it. Yeah. You do it for someone older, they go, oh, I wish I could do that, but I'd never try because I just don't have your talent. And I just think talent it annoys me, because it's like there is a nugget that makes one person better than another. If you get someone who is capable of being a sprinter and lives on fish and chips and pies, he's never going to be a good sprinter. If you get someone who goes running every day and has a very healthy diet, you think he's got a better than average chance of being good. Well, it's like that with anything. If you work at it, you're going to get better at it. But I've worked, obviously, at what I'm doing like for the best part of 35 years now, professionally. And I was working at it since I was 5 before that. And it's almost as natural as breathing to me. And when I say to people that I don't think about the lines that I'm putting on paper, I think about what I'm drawing. I don't visualise it. It's a bit like doing a police identikit, that I start putting things down thinking, yeah, that's him.
Yeah.
I remember him. It's that kind of thing. And that's just from practice. And that's what makes you extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't, it's not the ability to draw that's extraordinary, it's honing it to that level that's extraordinary. And I mean, everyone in this room, I'll bet I could teach to draw. It's just that they've been taught the wrong way. Because schools just don't understand drawing. They try and teach it the way that they teach maths and English, but it's a different part of the brain, it's a different type of thing. If you learn the right way, anyone can do it.
So do you think you'll get there as such? Like, is there such a thing as getting there? Do you know what your goal would be?
I hope not, because I'd have nothing left to do then. I always remember the Japanese guy that became the ultimate martial artist, and he tied a plastic bag around his throat because there was nothing else to do.
Wow.
He'd learned everything he thought he could about philosophy and about medicine and about everything. And he was like in 89 or something. I mean, I don't know if it's apocryphal, but I remember reading about it about years ago, and he just decided, I've done everything, now I'm just taking up space. I can't contribute anymore, I can't learn anymore. So that's it.
Wow. Now, I've taken up a bit of time there, so I'm sorry, I'm sure we have some more questions here. Yeah?
What's it like working with Brian Benders? Did he just let you get on with it, or...?
Well, I was told that Brian Benders wrote a different type of script for me than he normally does. And what I felt like is he'd written all the dialogue he wanted, and he'd broken it up just with Thor and Captain America. No explanation of what they were doing, just on Thor and Captain America, on Tony Stark. Then there may be a panel where it was more important to have a little bit of a description. But like Chris Claremont, I just felt there was a very solid story there. I knew exactly where everything was going. There's some of the writers more recently have struggled working on their stuff because they describe what they want in the picture and they describe what they want in the next picture, and my brain can't connect the two. I don't understand what they're doing and what they're trying to achieve, and because usually it's part of a bigger tapestry, I only know I'm doing this little part, so I'm frightened to add anything in case it's going to screw something up for someone else down the line. I mean, I'm currently something of news. I'm currently working with Jim Starlin on an Infinity project, and that is just fantastic working with Jim Starlin, because when he describes something, you know that he's thinking of a single visual. A lot of the modern writers, because they want to be screenwriters, what they do is they describe movie time, and you'll be actually having someone facing away from you at a scene while you can see their expression, and it's impossible to draw, and you either have to do two panels or else change what they're asking for in some way. Whereas with like I say, with Jim Starlin, he says this is what he wants, and it's just so easy to draw. I've never worked with another writer artist before like that. It's just been liberating.
That sounds so good. I can't wait to see that. Yeah. Yep.
We were talking earlier about the redesign of Captain Britain at the time, Marvel UK sort of claiming the character even though it had to be approved by Stan Lee and so on. People might be interested in that.
Oh, well,
the inspiration for the redesign from the Horse Guards and so on.
This is something we discussed in the hall. When I was asked to redesign Captain Britain, again with the naivety of youth, I just thought, well, I'll design a costume and that's it. I didn't think there was going to be any approval process. So I designed the Captain Britain, and I thought, because no one at Marvel UK liked Captain Britain with the line on his chest and the mask, because we all knew it was just a straight rip-off of Spider-Man, Daredevil and Thor sort of merged together. And there was a joke about the fact that he had the line on the chest, that he was a good egg, because of the eggs being stamped with the line at the time. So they just wanted a different costume. So I looked at the Palace Horse Guards, which is why Brian Braddock has the over-the-knee boots like the Palace Horse, and the white leggings. And they also had a sash. I just did a double sash. Originally he had an emblem in the middle, like a lion's head, which I used on another Captain Britain, and evolved it to look as a militaristic uniform. And I just handed it into Marvel thinking, this is totally right, I want to draw this costume, this is exactly the way that I see Captain Britain. And it was all accepted, and this is the way it was going to be. And then Paul Neary phoned me and says, actually, Stan Lee's coming over, he's going to want to have a final okay. Will you draw some of these, some other costumes, so that he's got a bit of a choice, that we're not just giving him a fait accompli. So I thought, I'm going to draw some really rubbish ones and send them in. And so I sent them in, and when I sent them off, I suddenly thought, oh God, what if he picks one of the bad ones? I'm going to be doing this. Fortunately, whatever happened, they went with the one that I liked. Although, some of the ones that I designed I used for the Captain Britain Corps on Otherworld, and later still, there was one used on one of the redesigns of Captain Britain a few years ago. One of my rubbish designs.
Wow. The past comes back to haunt you.
Unfortunately, every time someone puts a comic in front of me to sign, it's, oh God.
Yeah, well, you were saying, you finish one and you're like, that's not there, and that's what gives you the hunger. Do you ever look back at your old work, even if it is just to go, this is what I need to learn for next time, or is it done?
I do look back at work, but usually it's like after 5 years, because what I've found, especially if I've written and drawn something, when I try and read it, I don't actually read it. I remember what I was trying to write. I remember different versions of it, and I end up skimming through it and not really enjoying it. It usually takes about 5 years for me to forget what I've done until to enjoy it in some sort of detached way. But usually, like with a script, I usually really struggle over the dialogue. So I've got like 3 or 4 different versions of dialogue drifting around in my head, and I'll start reading the comic and think, oh crap, I should have used option 2. This isn't rewrite. So there's that kind of thing that haunts you. But I feel totally confident plotting a story. I feel totally competent drawing a story. But when it comes to writing dialogue, I just think, nah, I can get by, but I'm not going to try and deceive anyone.
So do we have... Yeah, we got a question back there.
What advice would you give to a young person trying to do art for comics?
I'd say do art to enjoy doing art. Get really good at it, but make sure you've got a plan B. As I said, I said to my son, have a plan B, and he went to do microbiology at university, and he ended up making that a career because he decided he didn't want to get into comics. Comics is a tough business to get into, and I don't know what the future holds. I know I should maybe try and be more optimistic to cheer you along. And what I would say is draw because you love drawing, and if you get good, as happened to me, you'll get along, you'll be fine. But it's learning to be good. Study everything. Study real life. Don't think just because you want to draw comics that you should only copy comics. Look at all types of art, and look at comics that you don't like to see what they're doing, see if there's anything. So just study everything and practice all the time. After a while, you don't think about doing it anymore. You've got a pencil in your hand and a paper, and you're not conscious of actually using a pencil on the paper. You're conscious of creating, and mechanics don't exist anymore. So it's just keep drawing, and keep learning.
Now, I think we had better leave it there before someone comes rushing in and going, stop, you must stop. This is a great place to finish. But as you heard from one of the questions there, it was actually inspired by a discussion that someone had with Alan on the con floor. So, there's probably time to be able to ask these other things later. But thank you so much for coming. And most of all, thank you, Alan, for sharing your wonderful career with us.